doing there? Right before starting this video, I was doing some leather work. What do you think? I made the belt as well as the holster. This is based off a 130-year-old design. This is for a single-action cowboy Uberti. I can't show that because this is the tube. I thought you'd like to take a look. That's what I made. It's amazing how long it actually takes to make something this simple. Just the belt. So, I thought you'd like that. You might not like it. I don't know. Yes, I do leather work. Gives me the opportunity to relax for a few hours since it's the weekend. One guy, I think he didn't believe me. Like in the past 24 hours, he emailed me the same thing over and over again, and he just thought I was ignoring him. It's like, it's the weekend, and I do actually have 4 jobs. So I kind of find that funny. Someone's like, you didn't get an email response immediately, but I'm just going to email them the same thing again. I don't know if people believe me when I say I work 4 jobs, but I actually do. It's kind of a low-key, yet incredibly important video, and even after 7,700 videos, which is what I think I have up, anytime I think someone will really like a video, nobody hardly watches it. And another video, it's like, well, this is important, and I think, well, not many people, it's kind of an obtuse subject. Not a lot of people like it. So the formulation, obviously, not fixed out. I never made a video in hopes that, wow, this is going to get a lot of views or clicks. I discuss things that are important and things that I think people watch me for a different take, a logical, rational, honest take on things. And I still do review things, although I haven't done much of that recently. But I want to talk about, because everybody keeps asking me about this, and this leads into part 2 on the methodology. And I'm trying to keep this simple, like I'm talking to little Johnny. Not that this is a video at all for youngsters or anything like that, but I mean, just to keep it simple. Not interested in big words. I mean, when I use words like centrifugal and centripetal, these are not big words at all, but a certain percentage of people think I'm trying to use some sort of intellectual impression upon people, and it's like, those are not big words, centrifugal, centripetal, capacitance and resistance. So I really do try to keep things simple. Regarding the principle of duality, which of course there are no dualities in nature, implying inherent contradiction, but I'd like to point out the very primary things that people are confused about in duality, because, and a few people actually recently, I would make a funny analogy about Mother Nature, like the hairy armpit chicks, and she doesn't use a calculator. They actually thought I was giving credence to the idea that there is some sort of sentient being that we would call Mother Nature, and I have never ever said that or even implied it. I'm just using a roundabout, manner of speaking and saying that natura naturans, or nature itself, is very simple. But the absence of duality, getting to monistic metaphysics and the principles therein that people are confused about, just make a really down-to-earth video about, and by the way, Pythagorean monism, which it's a liberation ontology based in wisdom. It doesn't matter if it's original Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, the Upanishads, Pythagoras, Plato, Plotinus, Numenius, Syrianus, Damascius, Iamblichus, Proclus. All of these people are teaching the exact same thing, and it is a liberation ontology based in wisdom. It has nothing to do with morality, and it certainly has nothing to do with immorality. The inversion of those two is something totally different. And likewise, too, we could talk about the head side of a coin and the tail side of a coin. And people think like you're either a nihilist / atomist / atheist, which is basically the same thing, or you're a creationist. Take your pick of creationism. This false choice, and a false choice, for example, that everybody's heard is, you're either with us or you're against us. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. People that deal in total absolutes. And that doesn't mean there's no absolute truth, but just because I'm not with somebody does not therefore mean that I'm against somebody. If you're standing on the sidelines looking at what's going on, just because you're not pitching in doesn't mean you're against that entity. So that's one of those absolutes. A false choice that people put out. Anybody says if you're not with us, you're against us, is a liar and a fool, and you shouldn't listen to them anyway, and you should just run along your merry way and never see or talk to them again. But the entire world operates off of a duality. And by the way, that's a passage from the ancient UNIFICATION. The entire world operates off of a duality. The antinomies, like head side of the coin versus the tail side of the coin, and it's all about the silver. My entire life I've never been interested in the head side or the tail side, rather the silver and the foundation, and the absolute foundation of monistic metaphysics, be it both Greek or Indian. And they operate off of many different names because nothing is known except through the modality of the knower, is about the rejection of dualities, because duality, insofar as any form of Abrahamic or religious metaphysics operates off the idea of original sin, or prima causa, or first cause, and there is none of that stuff in ancient Pythagorean monistic metaphysics. And I'm not interested in discussing or having a debate on religion, because it's, as the old saying goes, beating a dead horse. I've never ever been interested in that. But I want to talk about the things that are considered dualities, which are not, because nature herself, not that there is Mother Nature as an entity, does not suffer dualities, implying inherent contradiction. That which is called the demiurge, that which is called the euristostaios, and that which is called ananke, which is translated as necessity, these are all one and the same things. These are untranslatable words, and there are many words in ancient Pali and also too ancient Egyptian that are really untranslatable. Like the logos has no one translation. It'd be word, proportion, but if you actually understand what logos is, it doesn't require a translation. It's sublimate to existential consciousness, where people try to, well, cat means this furry little animal, and it's got a tail, and there are many different varieties, where we actually consciously ideate things, and many of these words, which are so important, have to be metaphysically understood at a completely different level. So people always want the translation, or they have false translations. This is the reason why, also, too, I never engage in the use of the word meditation, because it's an undefined term, and that's not my opinion, it's a fact. It doesn't refer to anything specific, and if we're going to be talking to each other or communicating, we actually have to be specific. This idea of a duality, by the way, in true metaphysics, and this really does take an enormous mountain of very, very, very good reading material, and it sums it up into a simple 20-minute video. There are two lights and there are two darknesses. The example of this, of course, is like light and illumination, which are not two things, rather one thing, principle and attribute. And just think about this for a second. Nobody could think of anything, either real or unreal, that doesn't have, at the very, very, very least, one attribute. And this includes the divine. By the way, the trinity of Abrahamic religions is actually extremely ancient. It belonged to the Pythagoreans, and who knows before them. We just have no record. I'm surely it's extant before the Pythagoreans came along. So this idea of a trinity is not original to Abrahamic religions, but I'm not interested in discussing religions at all. Anyway, there are two lights, once again, light and illumination, but those are not two lights, that's principle and attribute. Nobody sees light, for example, they only see illumination. There are two darknesses. There is a darkness of light as unmanifest. Like if there's only two things in the universe, the sun and yourself floating out in space, for example, in a spacesuit, only two things. I mean, it would be completely pitch black if you had, your back to the sun, because the light is, of course, a medium perturbation. It's a compound medium perturbation, a coaxial circuit, but this would be the one darkness, i.e. the light as unmanifest, because illumination is manifestation. Nobody ever sees light, they actually see illumination. The other darkness is, of course, the darkness of shadow, which is cast by matter, which, of course, itself blocks light, but makes things manifest. So there's two lights and there are two darknesses. Light and illumination. I like to talk about real and unreal antinomies or dualities, and just go off the primary set of 5 of these, light and illumination. Both of those are real, but they're one thing, principle and attribute. Here's the real and the unreal. For example, Dielectricity and magnetism. Magnetism is the dielectric field, that loss of energy or inertia that defines what dielectricity is. Say dielectric is water. Then the unreal would be, and of course ice is real, don't take the analogy too far, magnetism in the analog of water would be ice, for example. We know, of course, ice is a temperature modality of water. We give it a different name, but it is nothing other than the expression of the one and the same thing. The energy, which of course would be of water, the removal of that energy, where the molecule and its constituent atoms, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, are moving far less, is of course a condensation of water. It actually expands. Most things, when they actually get colder, contract. But magnetism is the dielectric field. Michael Faraday actually said this. But we have, for example, the real and the unreal. Magnetism, of course, is the force vector, so the dielectric is the real and magnetism is the unreal. Here are two things that, of course, are unreal. Magnetism, when we have this, an ancient premise posited in ancient Pali is when this is present, then that is present. In other words, every time you see this, you see that. Like every time you see inflation, we have misery and high gas and food prices, we have high gas and food prices, and you have personal misery and family misery. So it's a chain of things. When this is present, then that is present, and that is present. So these are two unreal things, magnetism and polarity. Okay, ideation of polarity does not ultimately exist. It is the inverse of inertia itself, which necessitatively, and the Greeks had a word for necessitatively, which is ananke, but it really means it can't exist any other way. The loss of energy or inertia, when you actually remove energy from something, it manifests as something else. When you remove the energy of the heat of water, for example, necessitatively it must manifest as ice, correct? And when you take it in a different direction, then it becomes gaseous, and we actually electrify it, then we actually have plasma water, but that's a matter for another discussion. Here's also two unreals that science fiction loves to think are reals, thinking ideation, also two relativity and quantum. Space and time. Space is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field, the volume of the donut, or the torus that makes up magnetism, and then we have another unreal. When this is present, then immediately, co-eternal, spontaneously manifesting at the same time, we have time, because time does not exist at all. It is an unreal. Both space and time are two unreals. Yet humans conceptualize these things as unreal. And humans, due to their lack of wisdom and understanding, reify these things. Reifying is making a mountain out of a molehill. It's building something out of nothing. Yeah. You blow up a balloon, of course, it's a little flaccid piece of rubber. You've made something big and puffed up that's not really anything at all. Of course, the balloon is full of, your exhaust from your lungs, but don't take the analogy too far. But human beings, ever since time immemorial, have loved to ascribe a different name to something that has absolutely no existence at all. There's 7 or 9, depending on what you count, primary things that don't exist at all. They're completely unreal. Space, time, emptiness, waves, force of what, by what, and due to what. Such a thing as a wave. A wave is what something does, not what it is. Same is true of these field modalities that these so-called scientists, which are not actually scientists, are trying to unify, looking for a grand unified theory. Because magnetism is just a dielectric field. Magnetism is the unreal. Dielectricity is the real. Light and illumination are both real. They're one thing and one thing only. Light. Because the property, but property is an incorrect word. The attribute of light is, of course, illumination. So space and time are unreal. Illumination and a shadow. Here we have the real and the unreal. Remember back to the two lights and the two darknesses? Now the two lights are both real. Light and illumination. We have the two darknesses. One is completely real, the light is unmanifest, and completely unreal, which is a different darkness, which of course is the shadow, a cast, the absence of light. Now a shadow, ultimately from a metaphysical standpoint, is no different than space and time. Time is only a measure and space does not exist. Space and a shadow are exactly the same thing from the premise of monistic Aristotelian Platonic and Pythagorean and even Neoplatonic metaphysics. By the way, Neoplatonism is just Platonism, and Platonism is just Pythagoreanism. Everything old is new again. You know, there's nothing new underneath the sun. Ultimately, too, the path of liberation, and people don't understand apophaticism, this via negativa of extraction. And this takes into part 2 video, which this is not, on the methodology of extraction. And this has actually puzzled Christian mystics and metaphysicians since the dawn of time. If the soul is ultimately pure, then why would we talk about the purification of the soul? Well, the same analogy applies here as given this rock by a rich person. You could probably see the gold right here. Right here, there might be $300 worth of gold here. Why do we talk about gold purification? Because gold is gold is gold. And the answer to the really, really ancient question of how do we purify the soul is completely antithetical. You know, purification implies you're taking something and you're turning it into something else. No, we're talking about actualization. Even though, say, for example, there's $300 worth of gold in this rock itself is worth about $30. It's a very nice rock, and that is actually gold. But gold purification never happens. This is an incorrect word. We're talking about extraction, concentration, making something self-similar, such when I hold this, I'm able to extract the gold. I have removed the gold from the modulation, because really this gold got modulated before it got pressed really, really hard by the earth itself, got modulated in amongst this black ferromagnetic material. The same is true of the soul. There's no such thing as soul purification any more than there is gold purification. Every ancient metaphysics, both Greek and Indian, Upanishads, Advaita Vedanta, original Buddhism, on and on and on, they all say the same thing. It's raining really hard outside. The removal of modulation is liberation. Yoga chitta vritti niroda, bhava niroda nabandham, suvimutta cetasa nabandham. What is liberation? Is it not extraction and removal from modulation? Magnetism is a modulation due to the release of energy of the dielectric, which manifests as this toroidal form. Everything in the universe that has mass and magnitude is due to magnetism only. But the volume of the donut, unlike a real donut, which is, you know, full of cream or whatever the heck used to, I haven't had a donut in 20 years, is space, the after effect of this three-dimensional force vector. Extrapolation, by the way, three-dimensionally of a three-dimensional force vector is a torus. That is literally the geometry of the release of energy or inertia, this crazy thing that we call magnetism. More advanced aliens, for example, wouldn't maybe call it a different name. They would just say this is dielectricity under loss of its own energy or inertia. Force equals magnetism equals centrifugal, because centrifugal is a diversion away from what? A rest point, a plane of inertia, a non-Cartesian point. And as I recall, so-called magnetic attraction, which is not magnetism, and so-called gravity, are all mutual accelerations, which is not force at all. And I always roll my eyes any time somebody says the force of gravity. Gravity is not only not a force, it's a complete inversion of force, and there's no such thing as magnetic attraction. Saying two magnets accelerating towards one another, no, they are magnets, but that acceleration vector is not magnetism, because magnetism is denotatively force in motion. So what are we talking about? Acceleration towards something that's not there. All gravitational masses accelerate towards a null pressure point between both. And it is anti-Cartesian, and that sounds kind of weird. And anti-Cartesian is no different than saying subspace, counter space, 0 point. It doesn't matter what sort of crazy name we actually give it. Humanity doesn't think like this, but this is retroduction. And retroductive analysis is the secret to understanding the universe. There are no dualities in this universe. So force is no different than saying magnetism, is no different than saying centrifugal, is no different than saying amperage, no different than saying the unreal. Because anything that is voluminous and its volume is nothing at all, i.e. space, that is holography. Now, general holography requires lasers. Actually, how holograms were created before lasers existed, and I've discussed that endlessly, but I won't here. No different than saying power dissipation or energy dissipation. We have two antinomies which are one and the same thing, like dielectric and magnetic. Dielectric would be love. don't accuse me of being a hippie here, okay? Dielectric would be love. And modulation, something that perpetually must be fed, bottomless, just like this fireplace, not that this is a real fire. You constantly have to throw logs on it, it has to be fed. What would the magnetic version of love, which would be dielectric, wouldn't that be hatred? And isn't hatred modulation? And evil and demons are, in a way, in love with hatred. It feeds them. They're in love with power. This, of course, is the unreal. Love, of course, is the real. And it doesn't require anything to be fed. It is acceleration, it is rest, and it is energy. The entire universe, at its very core and foundation, is so divinely simple, so divinely beautiful, contains such rational proportionality. And proportionality, the word of which in Greek is logos. I thought logos meant word. I thought it meant proportion. When you really understand what logos is, you don't try to translate it into English. You understand what logos is from top to bottom to left to right. It's like logos, I get it. By the way, I made these little, this is mine. I gilded it. It's ebony wood, the proportionality of the universe. These are two slopes, which are 1 and the base is phi, and the proportional cut of phi to 1 and 1 over phi. The absolute, and by the way, this particular form in triplicate makes up a Pythagorean pentagram. This is the logos, so the harmony of the aoristos dias. By the way, the aoristos dias is right up here at the point, which is 1 over phi to the power of -3, or 0.23606, which equals phi cubed, which is 4.23606, or the entire aoristos dias of the entire universe, the cosmos noitos and the cosmos ethithos, i.e. matter and spirit. And that which makes matter and spirit possible to be joined, i.e. a living being, necessitates water. And of course this is the exact geometry of water itself. Hydrogen here, water there. But I've talked about that endlessly in other videos. So, love and hatred, dielectric and magnetic. One requires perpetual feeding, and that by definition is force. Evil and demons confuse force with inertia. Most humans, 99% of humans on this earth, confuse force with inertia. That is unfortunate. This should have been taught to every youngster, every college student, every high schooler. None of it was taught. This is not religion, this is metaphysics. It's rational, it's demonstrable, and it's undeniable. And it's how the entire universe works. Amperage versus amperage equals magnetism, and of course force doesn't equal power. Force is the impotency of power. To feed magnetism, we must drain force. This is why magnetism is the dielectric field, the three-dimensional force vector that extrapolates out the toroidal geometry of centrifugal. What's the inversion of centrifugal? That would be centripetal. Love's an acceleration, too. No different than so-called magnetic attraction, but magnetic attraction is the stupidity of humanity. There's no such thing as magnetic attraction. That's dielectric acceleration, which is no different than gravity. One's point source and the other one is non-point source. That's the only discrepancy, and that's an attributional difference. You have the same thing, but an attributional difference. By the way, in power lines, if the amperage goes up due to lightning strikes, and there's other things that actually happen to power. When the amperage goes up, which equals magnetism, the power lines will spread apart. Yeah, it's amperage, by the way, that kills, not voltage. Voltage is equal to dielectricity. When there's an increase in the dielectric on an AC power lines, they'll actually swing towards each other. When the actual amperage goes up, they actually push each other apart. This is the conjugate geometry of the entire universe, the torus and the hyperboloid. The hyperboloid is just a double vortex which terminates at counter space. You can say in counter space, at counter space. Doesn't make any difference. Power is rest, inertia, and cooling. Isn't it amazing that the entire simplicity of this universe rests upon this conjugate principle which goes between love and hatred, magnetic, dielectric, amperage versus voltage? You could explain basically all the fundamental principles of this universe off this conjugate binary which manifests itself in field theory, conjugate principles of the entire universe that make up mass and magnitude, the real and the unreal, dielectric and magnetic, the real and unreal, magnetism and polarity, both are unreal, space and time, two unreals that absolutely don't exist at all. Does a shadow exist? A shadow by definition doesn't exist at all. It's an absence of light. But we give it a name and we know what a shadow is, but a shadow is not anything that is. It is the absence of what is. And by definition, it is therefore holographic, a mirage, and unreal. And this is what evil people and demons and stupid people are attracted to. They confuse force with inertia, and they confuse power with rest. I hope you liked this video. I tried to keep it very simple. If you ever want to contact me, my information is in the description below. Any donation too is always very, very warmly welcome. Lux Evertas. Man, it's raining pretty hard outside. Thanks for watching.